feel like whenever I talk about a bad book, it's a modern book. So we're going to change it up and talk about a bad 90s book, a bad Bantam book. And it's not Star Wars, believe it or not. It's Indiana Jones, but you knew that because you read the title and you saw the fedora. We're talking about Indiana Jones and the Sky Pirates by Martin Caidin, also known as probably one of the worst books I've ever read. That's a tough one. So, Sky Pirates is about a bunch of rich people that build UFOs that are controlled by a Zeppelin, I think. And there's going to be a lot of I think in this review because, quite frankly, I don't know what happened in this book. I watched a couple reviews on it, and they didn't know what really happened in this book. So, here we go. This is the first Indiana Jones novel to take place in the 30s, although technically I would put the Indiana Jones Adventures Volume 1 as happening like a couple months before this, because that was like in the winter, and this is more towards summer. But, yeah, Martin Caidin, what an author. Martin Caidin is probably one of the least qualified authors I can think of for Indiana Jones. He's a science fiction guy. He's an aviation expert. And oh boy, do we get the aviation expert in this. This book is about flying airplanes. So, there's a bunch of rich people that are they're using UFOs to try to control and manipulate the populace so that they think there's an alien invasion and these rich people can prevent World War II from happening. They know it's inevitable and they're going to use all their power to just steal things and commit and like get the world to unite together for like a new world order, I think. Heavy on the I think. So Indiana Jones is tasked by both the British government and the United States government to get a crackpot team to take on this threat. So you'd think, Indiana Jones is making a team. Who do we have? Sala? Jack Shannon? Marcus Brody, maybe? Though Marcus Brody's kind of useless except for her book knowledge, but no. No. We get generic witch redhead love interest. I think she's a redhead. I'm going off of the cover picture. Whose witch powers are never brought up again after they're brought up. We get Frenchman. We get British pilot. The Frenchman is both a spy and a pilot, so we have two pilots, technically three, because we find out that the witch is also a pilot. And we got some other people, including a Native American that shows up in the last two chapters, and is there because Martin Caidin killed a character, and it's like, well, we needed one more gunner. Oh, I'm writing a Native American in, who's like Indiana Jones' equal, but for the Native Americans, which is weird. I wonder if it's a nod to Mystery of the Blues, and that guy is actually the guy that's in Mystery of the Blues. I highly doubt it, but there was already a young Indiana Jones reference in this. So let's talk about this nonsense here. Jack Shannon is in this for about 2 seconds. He helps Indy with a train heist, which is just a terrible scene. Jack is for some reason working at the nightclub again, even though, so Martin Caidin attempts to, in the first couple chapters, establish continuity with Rob McGregor. He brings up Deidre a couple times. He brings up the previous books in the first chapter because he has Indy working at the University of London again for no reason. And I literally thought at first it was so jarring that I thought it was a continuity error. But then he puts in the shoehorn thing, which leads me to believe that Lucasfilm caught it and forced him to change it. That he's just doing a special one class for like the summer or something. And then, of course, he cancels it in typical Indiana Jones fashion and goes on an adventure. But, This is the weirdest book I've ever read. Indiana Jones. It's by far the worst Indiana Jones piece of literary media I've ever touched. I've not read like any of the YA stuff, granted, and I've not read all of the Marvel comics, so I cannot compare those to this. And I've not read all the novels, but this by many is considered like the worst Indiana Jones book. Worse than Steve Perry's Army of the Dead, which barely has Indiana Jones in it. This has Indiana Jones in it, but it's not Indiana Jones. I have a theory that this was a spy book about people flying an airplane, and they changed one of the characters to Indiana Jones because he does no archaeology stuff except for fake an artifact that the villains steal so they can track said villains. And then like one of his group gets killed by an animatronic bear. What? Why is that in there? It's like the Rainforest Cafe went berserk and killed one of his people, and you're supposed to care, but you don't give two shits about like any of these flippin' characters except for maybe the witch character, because she got the hots for Indiana Jones sometimes, and sometimes she doesn't. I think he shacks up with her. I think she was supposed to be like his next Deidre, but that didn't go anywhere. She like tries to get close to him one time in the whole book. But like remembers that he was married and his wife had died fairly recently. So like, I don't know. The other thing in this book is that near the end, which honestly I don't think it was in the initial version of the book because it feels tacked on, they reference that Indy was in the Belgian army. Okay. At this point in the books, the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles were happening. So it makes sense to start referencing those. You can. Rob McGregor didn't reference them solely because they weren't... I mean, when he wrote Peril at Delphi, it wasn't even a thing yet. It was in development, and he never had a hand in that show from any of the information that I could glean. But it's weird. This is a continuity book. In fact, it has the most continuity with other things than I think any of the books so far have. But every time you put the continuity in, it's the worst kind of continuity. It's clearly editorial, like Lucasfilm forcing it. And Martin Caidin couldn't care. Martin Caidin, quite frankly, I think was hired he like took the job just because he needed money. Because the dude was dying. This and the next Indiana Jones book were like his last two books. And like, it's clear he wanted to just write about airplanes because he had like a love for aviation, specifically pre-World War II aviation. There's a lot of history of planes, and my God, I might be able to fly an old airplane now because of how much nonsense about planes is in this book. And how far a Ford airplane can fly into the like stratosphere, basically. But the villains are like a weird threat because like Indy knows more than he's saying, and he's always like one step ahead of even his own team, which is annoying. It's like Martin Caidin he read Temple of Doom's novelization, where in that you don't really get Indy's perspective often in that. It's more Short Rounds and Willie Scott's perspectives. But when you do get it, it's interesting. But like he seems like the most competent one there in Temple of Doom until he's not, until he's out of his element. With this, he's clearly like 2 to 3 steps ahead of his whole group, and he just doesn't tell them things. And it's just dumb. It's so dumb. It's like Noah described it as a bad John Gardner James Bond book, and I kind of have to agree. Like, it's just nonsense, the book. The villains aren't even named till like the last 1/8 of the book. And then the ending climax, it just stops, and the book's done. There's no Indy going hands-on with the bad guy like in interior worlds where like he fights the villain at the end on top of the Statue of Liberty. Like, that's ridiculous, don't get me wrong. I loved every minute of it, but that's kind of stupid. But, you know, I can forgive it because that book's written well. This, they have a dogfight at the end. It's a dogfight with the flying saucers, which is neat, and it's different for an Indiana Jones book, and if it were better written, I could get down with it. But then suddenly the book's done, another one of the members is just blatantly dead. They all nearly freeze to death because they have to fly so high into, like, the flippin' stratosphere. And, like, I guess the bad guys blew up? I don't know. I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened in any of this book. It's just the most bizarre thing. Honestly, this has more in common with Timothy Zahn's wet fart of a book, Scoundrels, than anything else. Sure, you've got continuity, like Scoundrels does with A.C. Crispin's Han Solo trilogy, but it just kind of shits on everything. Scoundrels is an Ocean's 11 type plot between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, with Han, Chewie, and Lando. Now, if you've read A.C. Crispin's Han Solo books, or hell, even seen Empire Strikes Back, you know that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Because Timothy Zahn just decided one day that he just didn't care about A.C. Crispin's books because it's Timothy Zahn and he doesn't care about anything other than his own stuff, and possibly Michael Stackpole's books, because Michael Stackpole did a favor for him and helped him write a comic book once. So we end up with something that just doesn't make any sense and then makes Lando look bad. A similar thing happens in this when they bring back Jack Shannon. So Jack Shannon, for some reason, is back in Chicago, even though he fled from Chicago in freaking the fourth book, Genesis Deluge. He and Indy nearly get killed by Al Capone. He marries the girl from that book, and they have a child, and they live in San Francisco. That's something that's set up in Unicorn's Legacy. But instead, like, we didn't see him in Interior World, not to my knowledge, I don't remember. But now he's suddenly back working in Chicago doing shady gangster stuff, working the nightclub, and there's no mention of his wife and kids. It's similar to, like, the whole bringing back Lando. It doesn't make sense. He basically had a happy ending, and Martin Caden's like, we're gonna bring him in. Thankfully, he's not in the rest of the book. His name isn't completely soiled, unlike the rest of these characters. But yeah, no Marcus, no Sala. I mean, there hadn't been Sala up until this point. He doesn't show up till, I think, Philosopher's Stone is when Sala makes his Expanded Adventures novel appearance, because he does show up in the YA stuff. But yeah, it's just bizarre. This is one of the most bizarre things I've ever read. It's the worst Indiana Jones story I have ever read. It's better than Dial of Destiny, but not by much. Where Dial of Destiny is just so slow and awful. This is just a mind, like, it just ruins your mind. It's like taking too many, like, Quaaludes. Like, I don't know. It's a bad time. It's a real bad time. It's mind-boggling. I can't say it's the worst novel I've read, period. It's for sure in the top 5 worst things I've ever had to read. With that being said, I have read The House on Mango Street, which in my opinion is probably the worst thing I've ever read. I know that people consider that a classic, and that I am culturally insensitive for saying that, but it is the worst set of vignettes I've ever read. This, though, it ranks up there, along with all of Chuck Wendig's books, Alien Sea of Sorrows, the Predator novelization, Most of the Alien books that were written since Titan Books got the rights. I don't know. This was shocking. This was shockingly bad. And I tried to be nice to this book because I know Martin Caidin was most likely dying while writing this. But, like, I can't forgive how bad this is. It was, honestly, I have to write this part of the chronology for my chronology timeline book with Noah. I don't know what happened. He doesn't know what happened. I don't know how I'm going to write it. The wiki is so esoteric and strange about this one. Like, hell, there's even Indiana Jones and the Sky Pirates and Other Stories, a West End Games source book that shares a title with this, although it does put in all of McGregor's books that had been written up until that point. So the first seven Indiana Jones books did get a West End Games supplement. Maybe I need to read that. Maybe I'll figure out what happened. But as of right now, this gets a solid 0.3 out of 5.